What's up, everybody? Matt Hospital, our prospecting geologist here. Obviously not at home, if you can tell. I'm actually on vacation right now, but we're going to get this video shot for you guys. But this one is going to be on under prospected geologies of the East Coast Piedmont. So still kind of continuing along the lines of the previous two with the submarine exhalative and then mesothermal. But kind of going to diverge a little bit here into some younger geologies and stuff that generally are not prospected as much, yet still have some precedence for gold. And that is the Mesozoic Basins along the entire East Coast, basically from the exposed ones from South Carolina all the way up to Connecticut, basically. We're going to dig into those and how I think they are a geologic area that I think more prospectors should take a look at and could potentially produce some good gold for you guys. So let's dig into it here. So basically, we're still in the Piedmont area of just call it the East Coast now, from South Carolina up to Connecticut for this one. So we are getting further north along here. There, as far back during the gold rush and everything, there were no major gold mines within these Triassic basins, but there are and were a few minor prospects for gold from Pennsylvania down to North Carolina, as well as some rather major copper and iron mines, I believe primarily up in Pennsylvania and New Jersey area. So there's definitely something going on there, but I believe this area gets overlooked by most prospectors due to the lack of large-scale gold mining at any point in the past, and the fact that it's the rocks that are primarily make up these basins are generally sedimentary in nature, which in most cases are poor for gold, unless there's other things going on, which there's definitely plenty of other things going on in these basins. So basically, like I said, we have, as you can see in the map here, from basically Hartford, from Connecticut all the way down to a little bit into South Carolina, with the biggest basin kind of being the Gettysburg Newark Basin in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and then probably the second biggest either being like the Culpeper or the Hartford Basin. But we're still bordered by the Blue Ridge to the west and coastal plains to the east, with there actually being some buried basins out under the coastal plain that are not exposed. So those ones we can't really do anything with, but these other basins definitely have a precedent for gold occurrences at least happening in them, and I have actually found some gold from these basins myself. So once again, Pennsylvania, we kind of have the Gettysburg and Newark basins, and this forms those two basins kind of form what would be considered maybe the primary gold belt in Pennsylvania and like southeastern Pennsylvania. And then New Jersey, you have the Newark, obviously up in Connecticut. I didn't put it here. You have the Hartford Basin. Maryland kind of has a bit of the Gettysburg and a bit of the Culpeper Basins. Virginia has many basins, but there's even more than this, smaller ones and stuff. But there's the Culpeper, Scottsville, Richmond, and Danville basins. And then North Carolina also has more than what you see here with a bunch of little sub-basins. But basically the main ones are the Deep River Basin and the Dan River Basin. But generally these basins formed back as Pangea was breaking apart and rifting apart. So the Appalachian Mountains by this time are basically non-existent. The topography isn't quite what we have today. It's probably maybe a bit more mountainous. It's hard to say exactly, but it is not the Appalachian Mountains that were as high as the Himalayas at this point, even as back around 240 million years ago when Pangaea first started rifting apart, it was probably more or less the Appalachians were already eroded away, but not to the present point where they are now. Then by the late Triassic, these basins have formed, and you're getting what's basically considered what will eventually form the Proto-Atlantic Ocean. And then you have another basin set these are both active rift systems at the time, off over kind of what forms these current Triassic basins that we have in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, all that. But basically, these basins, as the ground like rifted and split apart, the surrounding areas eroded down into them and filled them with sediments. And then as the rifting was going on, and at the same time they were being filled with these sediments, there were also intrusions of igneous basalt diabase type rocks. So think the stuff that's out in the mid-Atlantic and in the mid-Atlantic ridge are kind of more like stuff that come not quite Hawaii, but similar in that way. Mafic. They call them mafic igneous rocks, which are very dark in color, high in iron minerals, low in quartz generally. And then by about 160 million years ago, late Triassic, the early Atlantic Ocean is now continuing to rift apart and form the Atlantic Ocean, pushing Africa and Europe away from North America. And then you have basically this other set of rift basins from Connecticut to South Carolina that is a failed rift system that did not continue to form into an ocean, but got infilled by the surrounding materials as well as igneous intrusive materials. So there's generally 3 to 4 types of deposits within these basins that could potentially host copper and gold, with the first one being mainly a hydrothermal alteration from those igneous intrusions. So basically, as the sedimentary rocks that were infilling basins were infilling it, you had the igneous rocks intrude up in, and it altered them due to the heat. The heat of the igneous rocks left these contact metamorphism areas surrounding them. And that definitely left a bunch of interesting hydrothermal alteration. A lot of times these are called skarn deposits. All of these would be characterized as epithermal styles of deposits, since they occurred rather shallow. But the hydrothermal alteration ones generally going to be considered skarn, which in many cases can be very rich in gold, copper, and other minerals. Then there's another type of deposit that's associated with like the circulation of ancient ocean water within the basin, because these would have been filled with probably salt water. But that one we're not really going to go into much because it doesn't seem like it has any bearing or any type of deposits related to gold. So we're not really going to go over that one. So we're going to be left with 3. And then there's a style of mineralization that's it's an alteration associated with fault zones kind of on the western sides of the basins. As the basins opened up, they were still faulting and moving. And this is semi-related to the igneous intrusions, is probably the water, the hydrothermal water that led to these alterations along the fault zones is also probably related to the igneous intrusions. And then for the last type, is basically going to be a Paleo Plaster deposit associated with sedimentation into the basin. So you get this basin open up, And we're in the middle of the Piedmont, so we have gold bearing areas possibly off to the east and west with gold veins. And as that basin opened up, you have all this, it completely changed the existing topography and how the water was flowing. So basically you would have erosion of these old gold deposits into the basins, and you get your rivers and stuff going in, and the placer deposits associated with them then eventually became lithified into a conglomerate breccia type rock most of the time. And a interesting one of the richest gold deposits in the world. I think it's called, I can't pronounce it. I'm going to butcher the name here, but it's the Witwatersrand in South Africa, which is a paleo placer deposit from way very, 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 very old, even older than the Appalachians. But it's one of the richest gold deposits in the world, and it's a paleo placer deposit in a metamorphosed conglomerate type rock. So paleo placer deposits can potentially be extremely rich. And there's a number of instances where these paleoplacer deposits were prospected even back during the gold rush days. So, the hydrothermal alteration deposits, they're going to be associated with any of the diabase dikes and sills that intruded these Mesozoic basins. And while these dikes and sills also intruded the older country rocks surrounding the basins, it generally did not alter those rocks surrounding the basins because they are already so cooked and altered that the heat wasn't able to raise it past what they'd already been cooked to. So really the only areas where you get hydrothermal alteration, skarn styles of deposits are where these igneous intrusive rocks intruded the Mesozoic basins. An interesting thing here with these is these Mesozoic basins to the south, so think like center of Virginia and down into the Carolinas, there's less intrusions into the basins. And center of Virginia north up to New Jersey and Connecticut, there's many more of these igneous intrusions for whatever reason that is. I'm not 100% sure. But so I would generally consider that the deposits down in North Carolina and South Carolina aren't going to have as many of these, if any, of these hydrothermal alteration deposits that you will find in basins like the Culpeper, Gettysburg, Newark, and Hartford basins up into Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and all those. The amounts of gold from these hydrothermal alteration deposits varies. Some can be very rich. A lot of them are more so copper or iron, like the Cornwall mine in Pennsylvania is a very well-known one that had gold as a tertiary resource that they extracted. But there's generally no mines of that size further south, even in Virginia. There's generally any of the bigger mines of copper and iron were in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. But the amount of gold can vary from location to location greatly in these hydrothermal type skarn alteration deposits. So then let's go into the hydrothermal alteration kind of that's more so, it's probably associated with the igneous intrusions, but it seems to be more so, these ones seem to be centered along the fault zones on the west side of the basins. So the fluids that altered the western fault zones are probably from the intrusion of the igneous rocks, heating up water, causing it to move around through the basins and dissolve minerals out of certain areas and deposit them in others. In places, these fault zones along the western edge of these basins have been altered to the green schist facies. And if you remember in the previous one, green schist facies, green minerals, is always good to look for. This is along a fault zone, so it definitely has some good signs. And the common minerals that are kind of associated with these western fault zone alteration areas include epidote, chlorite, sericite, amphibole, albite, calcite, anchorite, and quartz. And those are all like, if you hear that suite of minerals being mentioned anywhere, uh, your ears should perk up because there could be potentially gold. And of those, the epidote, chlorite, and amphiboles can definitely be kind of a greenish color. Um, so you definitely want to perk up and listen when you hear those type of minerals being mentioned. Um, and then the paleoplacer deposits, they formed as the area around the basins were eroded. They got the material got deposited into the basins, and if there was gold veins in the country rock surrounding these basins, which in many cases there is and was, even though it's not the current topography we see today, it's probably something similar, and there are probably still gold veins in various places, though they might not be where they are now. It could have been elsewhere, if that makes any sense. But that stuff would have got eroded in as a placer deposit and then eventually lithified. Virginia and North Carolina both have gold prospects within these paleoplacer deposits. Nothing crazy or huge ever came of them, but there's definitely documented gold to have come out of them. And I have found what I believe is probably gold from these Triassic Basin conglomerates as well in Virginia myself. So then let's move on to the part that everybody once again is probably here for after we get through the science and nerding out, is what are the implications for actually finding some of the gold from these. So since there's not really much associated mining, there are some prospects. There's not really going to be much in the way of brownfield explorations to even do, because there's very limited mining and prospects that happened in the first place. Up in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and stuff, there's a lot more. And if you would want to get around those old copper mines in particular, would be good places to start, because a lot of them probably pulled out gold as a secondary or tertiary product. So you'd have to look into those ones up in that area. But for the greenfield exploration within these Mesozoic basins, for the mineralization related to the igneous intrusions, as well as probably the fault zones, basins from about central Virginia north are going to have a better chance of deposits associated with these igneous intrusions, because once again, further south there seems to be less of the igneous intrusions for some reason, so you're not going to have that alteration. And then further north, there's probably going to be more, because there's a lot more of these igneous dikes and sills that got intruded into the basins. Most of these basins also have very good geologic mapping and reports that have been done for them. Not always related to gold, but it's still there, and it still tells you where the intrusions were, where the conglomerates are, all that type of stuff. So for this, if you're searching for placer gold that came from the skarn styles of deposits, you're going to want to find sections of rivers and creeks that are downstream from where these igneous intrusions came into the Mesozoic basins. And there's many areas. I've already mapped out 3 or 4 just in the Culpeper Basin alone. Not to mention all the other basins throughout Virginia and then up into Pennsylvania and elsewhere. So, obviously, if those igneous intrusions came up and they altered the rock around them, then you have these rivers flowing across. Those rivers are going to erode and move the material somewhat downstream and off of the intrusions themselves. So you're going to want to find those contacts between the igneous diabase dikes and sills and gabbro dikes and sills, and prospect primarily the sedimentary rocks of the basins that are down downstream of them. It's going to be your best chance for gold. And the same thing kind of goes for the western fault zones. They're very well mapped. And you would want to prospect downstream of those western fault zones. And that's where your gold, if there's gold associated with the alterations that happened along those fault zones, that's going to be your best place to find them, is the downstream areas from those western fault zones. And we're going to go through and kind of take a look at once again, we'll go into Google Earth and take a look at a bunch of this stuff on the geologic maps as well here in a little bit. And then as far as the greenfield explorations go for the Paleo Placer deposits, the basins with known gold-bearing terrains and gold-bearing and gold mines directly adjacent to the basins are going to be the best areas to explore for paleoplacer gold. And it's always generally going to be at the edges of the basins where this infill, where the coarsest material would have been deposited, is going to be the best place. So generally, the edges of the basins are going to have more of the conglomerate and breccia-type rocks that could host paleoplacer deposits. So once again, you want to focus on the creeks and rivers in areas downstream from where they cut the conglomerates and breccias. And so both of these pictures you kind of see in the background here of the implications for exploration are from one of these basins in Virginia, and we are on the left one here. We're on a red siltstone, but there was interlayered conglomerate, and whenever we dredged and got around the conglomerate or on top of the conglomerate, we generally found better gold. And we also prospected upstream off of the Triassic Basin material onto the older country rock and found almost nothing, which is telling me that most likely this gold that you're seeing in the right picture there is coming from the conglomerate of this basin. We didn't find anything crazy. We didn't get into like really, really great gold, but there was definitely enough there to pique your interest. And this came from a rather small basin in Virginia with not much in the way of conglomerate, nor much in the way of any type of intrusions or anything. But it definitely seems to have hosted paleoplacer gold that's now actively being eroded into the river that flows over it. For any of the pictures and stuff that you saw there is the bibliography. There's all my references. But let's kind of dig into Google Earth here. So I have all the geology pulled up from basically North Carolina up to New Jersey. I did not go into Connecticut, I'm sorry. There is a basin right here for probably New Haven up into Massachusetts that could potentially host some gold related to the igneous intrusions within these basins. But right now, as you're looking at this, the Culpeper Basin right here is the easiest to see with the reds intruding into the that brown. Let's zoom in a little bit. So that's the Culpeper Basin. I'm going to turn roads off. They're seeming to get in my way. That's the Culpeper Basin. You come up and then you see the Gettysburg Basin, and it turns into the Hartford Basin. Right through there, and then you can see some sub-basins. You have the Richmond Basin right here. I think the Scottsville. Here's the Danville. Here's the Deep River. And as you see, if you look, you see this bright red, which is like gabbro and diabase sills that intruded these basins. But as you look further south, you'll see some dikes, but you generally won't see any of those massive sills intruding the basins. It'll more so just be the brown. But even these straight lines of these dikes that you can see running up through here, around those could have contact metamorphism and skarn styles of deposits. But as you can see, there is. So then here are some of the, for North Carolina, I kind of mapped out some of the known prospects that were on these, including the Bell Branch occurrence, the Womble prospect, and the Mangum Gold 2. And you see there, I mean, all across the Deep River Basin here, and then even this, there's a tiny little sub basin near Winston-Salem. And all these produced gold at some point, at least a little bit. Um, but in areas where the gold deposits are closer to these basins is going to be a better chance for you to find that Paleo Placer gold. So let me try and turn on. It's obviously not the Virginia one. Hang on, guys. Gets there. So we're going to take a look. So here's then the gold belt of Virginia. And I did find paleoplacer gold in one of these other smaller basins out here. I won't go into the specific one. Those videos are on YouTube, and I will be sure to pin them in the comments section below this video. But so you have the Culpeper Basin here, and you see how these known gold mines kind of ride right up on the one side here. And also this basin seems to have intruded and cut away at the Chapawamsek, which is the known gold-bearing formation in Virginia. So this area right along here and then probably right up through here would have a good chance of those paleoplacer deposits, where gold from these eroded into these basins as they were forming and being filled. And then for the hydrothermal alteration deposits related to the dikes, obviously you see the red. So you'd want to be like downstream of any of those contacts within the basin. So like if there's a river cutting right through here, you would, and it's flowing towards the east, towards Woodbridge, you would want to be dredging and prospecting in this area or downstream of any of those where the river or creek is crossing those red areas, the diabase or gabbro dikes and intrusions. Yeah, see, it's calling it diabase there. These are still, once again, not the greatest maps on Google Earth here, but they will generally get the point across. And then as we head up into Pennsylvania, so here's the Cornwall mine. You'll notice all the, so I added the gold occurrences of Pennsylvania basically in here, and all of them occur within these Mesozoic basins. So all the primary gold that was generally found in Pennsylvania is in some way related to the Mesozoic basins. And for Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, is going to be related to hydrothermal alteration deposits or faulting. I don't think you're going to find paleoplacer gold deposits within the Pennsylvania or New Jersey basins or even Hartford, because there's just simply no, in the surrounding geologies, there's no known gold occurrences within the surrounding geologies. So the paleoplacers are probably not going to be there, but the hydrothermal alteration type skarn deposits definitely are much more prevalent up this way. And while New Jersey did not have anything saying gold deposits were being found, they did have plenty of copper. So everything you see in here is all copper, and it's almost all exclusively within the Mesozoic Basin. And I would risk to say that there is probably at least small amounts of gold associated with any of those copper deposits. So even up into New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and stuff, that's where your gold is coming from. It's coming out of these skarn skarn styles of deposits, and then the alteration around the western fault zone, probably, or other fault zones that happened around that time. Best places to prospect. There's a number of other references and material for all this. I will try to add that as a link in the description so you can have access to the documents that go through and lay out all the different mines and prospects that happened within these Mesozoic basins, as they can give you kind of then a somewhat brownfield type stuff to go off of, where if you can get as close as you can, you'll have a better chance. But much of this is kind of, while it was prospected at one point a little bit, I really believe it's a under-prospected, underutilized area for modern gold prospectors, because the technology and equipment we have today, is even just the suction dredges, are going to be far more efficient at recovering gold out of the now active current placer deposits that cut these. And who knows, there could be some really rich stuff in there that just got missed, especially in regards to the Paleo placer stuff, because we just don't know much about it. And we don't know much about the exact how everything and the geography was at the time. I mean, these gold deposits could have been, the known gold deposits not in the basins could have been richer higher up, but all that's just, it was lost due to erosion, but it could have been retained and withheld within these breccias and conglomerates along the basins and stuff. So there could be some really rich gold in there. And also with these basins, so you're getting so it's a paleoplacer deposit. So those streams and rivers concentrated that gold just like normal placer deposits kind of do, even though the East Coast doesn't really do it quite as much as the West. It back then it probably was. So it concentrated the gold in certain areas. And now, if one of those areas were to then be eroded again, it would be getting doubly concentrated then by the active erosion of the current rivers and creeks going over it. So there could be some really good placer deposits in there that just aren't known. So if you want to get out and try prospecting some new areas that definitely have at least a little bit of gold known to have been found and could have some greater potential, then some of these Mesozoic basins might be the ticket to go check out. And like I said, I have found some nice gold flakes within a small one of these basins. And a buddy of mine, I think he pulled out a picker from one of these basins too, right near where I was, just panning. So the potential's there, and gold can be found in it, and it is definitely an area I would think you guys should look at. And especially if you're up in Pennsylvania or New Jersey and up into Connecticut, it holds the potential to look at least with the alteration deposits. But if you enjoy this type of video, please like, share, and subscribe. And we will be doing more here coming up. I think we might be taking a break from the Geology series here, though, and going back into some dredging stuff. But that wraps up this video. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you guys later.